Hi, David.
Hi, Sarah.
There's a topic that I would like us to explore today, which is about what it's like, what life is like for somebody who is highly sensitive and also highly functioning. So they've actually cleaned up their energy. Their energy is now connecting really well. The circuits are all working really well in the ways that you've described in other videos. What what difference does that make to their energy and what difference does it make to their life?
Well, there's a lot of really, there's so many things that everybody does and doesn't do that all sort of easily gel. So, but there is some demographics of like therapists. It's going to be a little bit different than, say, someone who's, say, a yoga teacher or an artist or a muso, because certain demographics have very sort of innate things that they detune and turn off. And what happens to them, it's just, and they work a little bit differently. Say, from if you're a doctor or an entrepreneur or a teacher or a healer or a energy worker, if you like, or
So, are
even
you saying that they kind of detune themselves in different ways according to the
yeah,
type of work they do?
yeah,
That
they
would be
do, they
interesting
do.
just to understand a little bit of just a tiny bit of a couple of examples maybe of how
Yeah,
that
yeah.
happens because then we can get more of a picture of what they're like when they're fully functioning.
So, like, most most people detune when they come on the stresses of everybody else. It's like, um, we try and make a whole cycle of energy, and it's not totally possible, which means our intuition and our instincts suffer. Then we aren't as certain on certain figures of what's going on. We can't process enough information readily, and it makes us very angry, or we sort of tune out. And in all areas of high sensitive people, um, we tend to like a little bit of alone time, because when we're by ourselves, it's not that we're not highly functional. It's just that when we're by ourselves, that's when we can listen to ourselves. Now, highly sensitive people do something that most people don't do. We actually listen to our senses, whereas the average person walking down the street, a lot of people don't actually listen to our own information of what's going on, which is telling you lots and lots of different information, which means that most highly sensitive people, in a lot of cases, they tend to follow more a trait of what it is that they really should be doing in life. In some instances they're not. Instances, some people just fall into a trait, that into an area where it feels comfortable for them. But there's a lot of really highly sensitive people, like artists and musicians, or all the arts for that matter. They're really following something that they get a lot of feedback from. So we have all these feedback mechanisms in our body which highlight what is basically, we all have different demographics of self, and we've got to find, we all have different abilities. And when when we're highly sensitive, we tend to learn to listen to something that really we enjoy doing. So we're going to pursue that. It's like, the yoga teachers, all the artists, entrepreneurs, are another large demographics. The amount of entrepreneurs who are highly sensitive, and yet, a lot of entrepreneurs, when I first started talking to them, they're sort of very scattered and all over the place, and even doctors and nurses. But I've done quite a few workshops for doctors and nurses where they've they've started out really, really enjoying it, but they've got burnout basically because their senses are just pushed to the limit, and they just can't handle anymore. But you could say that more of a physical thing, but actually it all starts with the way our spirit moves and the way our energy moves. And it breaks down all different types of conscious. So it's a bit like we isolate the little areas, and then before we know it, we aren't really getting any joy out of what's going on, which is why. So then we just listen and listen and listen, and then we become, instead of a highly sensitive person, is we're a detuned sensitive person, and this person then really isn't a highly functioning as we described. And so to differentiate everything, once if I put everybody into a great big category and just joined them all together, rather than, because they all have such quite different scenarios of what's going on, but there are some scenarios that are all pretty much the same. So all of a sudden, the highly sensitive person, when they're spending a little bit of alone time, they seem to be able to listen more quite easily to what is their own personal messages. Now, when we say that, it's not really meditating so much. It's more like you're able to listen to what's going on in your own spirit. You're able to listen to what's going on in your own consciousness and basically your own energy, because we've done so many different exercises. So um, the the spirit aspect of everything is always the most underrated thing that I find everybody completely pushes out of the picture, because we only generally go on the physical feedback of, the emotions, the feelings, and oh, we're going to think this way, we're going to breathe that way, and yeah, that's good. But at the end of the day, we're all going to go back, because we've got all these cycles going on, which means that you can't break down certain cycles, or you could call it a bad habit, but really everyone's just doing as good as we can do. And that's why people tend to not think of trying to get a little bit of help and think that they're broken. It's not that you're broken at all. It's just that you've desensitized. You still got all your basics there. And really, in a way, you're not broken. You're just ultra over sensing certain areas that are trying to make up for the ones that you aren't using, which then when we try and we listen to all those oversensitive parts, then we get angry, then we get a little bit depressed because we're not feeling all the other things, and we get very agitated on certain things because um, people don't, the average person doesn't listen to the wide variances of all the information that we receive. So, someone who's highly sensitive, you're listening to a really wide array of demographics of everything that's going on about, this massive kaleidoscope of information you're listening to constantly. And the more information that we get, as I've said before, the happier we are. So, when we start to become highly functional, we always start with the spirit energy. And once we learn how to use that spirit energy, all of a sudden we turn on different areas of conscious, because those consciousnesses, basically it's like having all your different backup buddies all in a row, and they're all starting to give you information. And then of course we integrate all the physical outcomes and the processes, but we also learn to process information on every area. So we learn to use spirit information, because instead of thinking spirit is just some tra-la-la area in the sky or whatever, it's what your priest does or whoever. It's not. Basically, we all have a spirit energy, and it's how we use our soul and heart energy, and it's the one that backs us up. And when we use it, it's we probably need some people to with us sometimes to say how much it transforms them. But as I've said before, there's some groups who really change quite quickly, and it's because we have this transference of energy and consciousness. and postpartum and or postnatal or something like that. It's how we shift, how um, the influence of our spirit moves, because we all invest in everybody. So, as I said, when you're investing in a child, that's probably the biggest thing that you could, that's probably the biggest creative thing you could ever do is invest in a child. But quite often, you invested so much spirit in that child, and without knowing it, you've just allowed so much to go in because we try and protect that child, you know. But the same thing goes in for jobs and all our different things that we go on. But just for the moment, we'll say we're talking about this child, and then as this child is born, a lot of your spirit can go to that child, and then when that happens, basically the person can feel completely and utterly non-existent, and it's like nothing matters because all their spirit has been given away. Now this is an extreme case, of course, but then everybody has something like this, even guys. So when all this extreme spirit goes to someone else, especially for highly sensitive people, it's quite easy to happen. When you bring that spirit back, all of a sudden that person is turning everything back on. So I've given you that existence, and then all of a sudden the person who's had that postpartum is all of a sudden loving their children. They're also loving the husband again, and you know, everything comes back together. And basically what happens is the spirit moves the consciousness, and the consciousness moves the physical, and then we have all these different types of receptors that you get all the information from. And it's actually, unfortunately, we've done some, excuse me, some scientific work where we've started on a workshop, and everybody's energy is sort of sitting way out of them, and then all of a sudden, by the time we've even come to the first end of the first day, and that's just doing a few hours work, everybody's energy's more bored back in. It shows quite easily how people change so much more. All of a sudden, everybody's nice and relaxed. Everybody's able to have a totally different conversation, because the conversation changes, because once the spirit comes back in, all of a sudden you're functioning with your spirit, which means your self-confidence starts to come back. So it's a bit like, well, I'll just stand over here, and I'm not really feeling that confident in a lot of people around. But it changes as soon as your spirit starts to come back and it starts to work and starts to reform. It's not that you're getting to know everybody or you're just having the experience. It's like you feel confident enough because, one, you know, you're not as broken as what you may perceive, and unfortunately, highly sensitive people often feel they're broken. But then, if we take a different context to say that we basically focused on sharing all our information and giving all our information in a work venue, and we start to invest all this time, and basically, if we love our work, we invest a lot of our spirit in it, in a way. We also, which moves our energy and shuts down certain things. But if we're not careful, you can sort of just overexert all your spirit, and there's so much spirit you can actually counter transference and basically send your spirit out, so it's sitting out here because you're so exhausted spiritually. Then your conscious starts to turn off and detune, which means it's a real effort to do anything. You just cannot come out of your shell. It's like, oh God, I'm going to work. But um, another, and it's the same for like teachers, and you're putting so much in. You love your subject, you love your job, and you're just giving it back. And I had a couple years ago, I had a few university lecturers who absolutely loved their job, and one of them rang me up and said, I've lost my mojo, Dave. Can you help me? And I said, sure. So, and it was, I'd really only seen him twice. And he laughed when he, when I saw him on the third day. He said, wow, he said, even everybody who's, all my receptionists and everybody else, he said, they're just laughing because they wanted to know what I'd done because I was whistling when I walked down the hallway. He said, usually you're grumbling and almost want to kick the cat as you walk to work. So it basically, a highly functional person, that's what happens when you're highly functional. You have all these opportunities to turn everything on, but you can turn them on so damn easily because we can note all the different things that goes on. And we give everybody all these exercises that hold that what you learn. We give you exercises to just keep you turned on, and then it's a lot easier and keep functioning so that you notice all these different things that are going on around you. You you tend to notice where people are all focusing on something, on a problem, and you'll just walk in and say, well, that's not even the problem, that's it there, because you see this really, really vast logic, if you like, because your consciousness is able to simulate all these different things going on all at once because we use all these different areas where you work simultaneously.
Maybe I
And
can give some examples because as I'm listening to you talking about all these groups of people, I realize I'm a teacher and I used to be a school teacher even. I'm a healer. I've done a lot of coaching. I'm pretty creative and I'm an entrepreneur. So I actually can, it's interesting for me listening to you. I'll just give a few examples from my own life because I think it's helpful to translate what you're talking about into the practical context of life. I noticed that in the teaching, for me, perhaps that's the easiest area of all, because first of all, I think by having my energy well turned on, I'm very present and never have to think about anything when I'm teaching. If I'm preparing something, it's like it takes me such a short time to prepare. I prepared a whole year's curriculum in an hour or so, and I then actually had to teach it. I spent a whole weekend recording all the core materials for a whole year's curriculum. I had the notes that I wrote in an hour, which was just like 12 little blocks of 5 lines, and I did it just from that, and I did the whole thing in one go without making mistakes. Now, that has come from the fact that I'm not second guessing myself. I don't sit down and think, is what I'm saying wrong? Am I doing it wrong? Is this going to be okay? I'm able to sit there, trust what I'm doing, know that I'm able to connect with the information that's going to be relevant to the audience that I haven't even met yet, and do that teaching. And in that case, it was recording. And it's the same when I'm in front of a group of people and they ask me questions, the same as with you. The information is available all the time. It doesn't matter what they're asking about, the information is always available. And as an entrepreneur, there's a huge amount of time and energy saved by being switched on rather than switched off. And I know what it's like to get into that kind of loop where you go round and round and you can't see the wood for the trees and you can't make decisions. I've been there many, many times. But that feeling, and it really, I talk a lot about I feel this, I sense this, because that's the language, how I discern everything that's going on. If I'm in a meeting, I'm sensing all the time everything that's going on in that meeting. And the minute it begins to feel like, oh, we're getting heady, so we're getting not practical, nothing's going to happen because we're just talking in our heads, it's so uncomfortable for me that I have to kind of take action to bring it back. Because the feeling I have, and I only became aware of this maybe a year or two ago, it's like I'm listening with all of myself. I'm not listening just with my ears and my brain. I'm listening through this whole self that's much bigger than my body. And it's like I've got senses everywhere, under my feet even. That's how it feels almost, like they're everywhere. Everything's listening. And then if it starts to feel like the only thing that's happening is in my head, I know that we're getting out of touch. And so I bring all of myself kind of to that meeting, whatever I talk about, to, because I know that if I'm fully, the whole of me is involved, whatever we talk about, we'll create. It'll happen really naturally. Whereas if we get into our heads and we're planning and we're thinking and we're talking and it's round and round in circles, none of it's actually going to happen without a lot of really hard work. So, those are some of the examples of things that I experience that I've come to realize that most people don't experience the same way as me. I think I just thought I was the same as everyone else, and in many ways I am. But I've come to recognize that those are fairly unusual. Um, those are some examples of what I just described.
Exactly. And I noticed, I mean, I've noticed in myself, there's so many things that I wouldn't have tried um, just to get out and do. I mean, I'm going back quite a lot of years, and there's a lot of things. And I noticed when I was traveling, there was a lot of things I thought, wow, I wouldn't have done that like even a couple of years ago or 5 years ago. And I mean, I certainly wouldn't have stood up in front of 3,000 people
And I
as I
would
did
imagine
now,
you can do that. You can do that just completely
just
naturally.
just naturally off straight off the bat, and it's fun. And the
That's what
more,
I also found. Like people say, oh, it's really important to feel nervous if you're going to do some speaking or something. I haven't done 3,000 people, but a year or two back, I was in front of a room of 100 people, and it wasn't a speech. I didn't want to do a speech, where you have a set of slides and it's all planned out, because they were all women. They knew a lot about what I was talking about, so it was silly to go and do a speech where they would know a whole lot about it already.
all right,
So I went in much more kind of natural, much more spontaneous, which is a really risky thing to do in that kind of situation, or most people would say. And honestly, I didn't even feel like I was shaking. I didn't feel any trace of nerves at all. I felt so present and relaxed, and I enjoyed it from the moment I was on the stage. And I definitely would not have been like that when I was younger.
I know. And I remember years ago, I had to have like PowerPoints all the time, but the PowerPoints really weren't for me. They were more for the people because some people tend to learn completely differently. Some people read, some people hear, or whatever. And any time I've had PowerPoints, they're not so much for me. They're just to jog some people as we go along. And as we put a little PowerPoint there, it's just to jog some person's unconsciousness, because as we detune, something that was in your everyday conscious, of course, gets pushed down to subconscious or unconscious or subliminal conscious. And as we begin to move certain parts of our spirit, then those consciousness become a little bit more functional, especially once we find all the different types of energy. And then, if you can imagine a part that was unconscious, we'll bring it back to subconscious, and some parts that were, subconscious. Well, they're highly available all the time. So it's like you have this huge reservoir of energy and limitlessness that you can just get out and talk about and pass on the information that's needed, and it's so damn effortless,
Yeah.
and you don't.
Can you give some other examples of people who you've seen or who you've worked with, um, and how it's made them more functional in their life?
Yeah. There's a lot of who will we start with? So we'll start. We'll start. I've had
Don't
lots and lots of. I mean, I've had so many yoga teachers in my life. I mean, at one stage, it was like hundreds, and all of a sudden, you're sort of shared through different communities. So the yoga the yoga teachers seemed to be one community who I was really shared with, and I said, look, we're going to teach you how to use your energy and how to ground and not to go into different areas that um, everyone is sort of focusing on all the crap that's gone on in their lives, so that when you've got a classroom, as soon as you go into your first movement, all of a sudden the few people don't start sobbing, and or if there's a lot of people who've had a real crappy day, you get all this counter transference. So basically, everybody starts to either feel sort of heady if it's all been about really uplifting things, but maybe not so much really about what's really going on in the world, or if a lot of certain emotions have been going on, or like when COVID's going on, everybody's sort of all it's like their whole energy's all squished up. So what happens is that we teach the yoga teacher how to basically be more free, and their energy is all nice and free, and conscious moves and comes out, and it's not so repressed and suppressed. So this person is way more confident, and they're not feeling the limitations. But whereas previously, as soon as all their clients came in, all their energy and consciousness, and sometimes their spirit as well, it's sort of like quite compressed. And then if you had a lot of really strong people in the class, they always felt very vulnerable, and it's like they're always under the microscope and didn't have the confidence sometimes to really express what everyone really needed to do. Whereas now they don't care. Everyone comes in, the whole class stays on task. Everybody enjoys the class. Everyone's a lot more relaxed. The big thing is they don't have all this counter transference of what's going on in the whole class. So it doesn't go bang, 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 bang. And it's the same for doctors and entrepreneurs. So I have a few entrepreneurs who they won't go into a meeting without doing what we call an active grounding. And in an active grounding, it's not just like going out and walking on the grass. It's actually where we move our energy, and we engage our spirit, we engage our consciousness, and we engage our physical energy, and all your physical energy comes in. What it does do, it uses also a part of our inner ethics. So if you've got something that's very ethical, it takes on a very neutral form, which means people relax, because otherwise, as soon as you walk into a meeting, it's like, oh, yeah, here we go. What's the bloody big hard sell we're going to cop today? It just means that it's nothing like that. It means that you're opening up this opportunity. And if the person you'd find it really helpful, then they take it on. And it's like, well, I'm not trying to sell you anything. It's just here. If it's good for you, it's good for you. If it's not, well, that's fine too.
I'll give
But
you an
it allows
example.
it opens this opportunity. So I mean, these guys, I mean, they're talking 50 to a few $100 million when they go and do deals, and once they start working with a few people, they've told a few other people, and it it just allows their businesses to basically grow. And it's quite autonomous the way it goes. It just through referral, because you're highly functioning, and highly functioning sensitive people use this neutral energy because it's not over negative, it's not over positive, and it just allows for this broad spectrum of ethical conversation to carry on.
Which means that you're not manipulating people. You don't
No,
have to
no, you
try
don't.
to get them to buy something. You don't have any nervousness about it. Your energy gives the other person the freedom to make their own choice, because you're not relying on that person energetically to somehow feed your need for money or whatever else, your
No,
need for recognition. You don't need any of that. And so you can give people freedom, and actually people respond to that. And if it's the right product for them, they'll buy it. And if it's not the right product for them, they won't buy it. And that's absolutely as it should be.
and you're not hyping everybody up. You're not hyping, oh, hey, 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 hyping everybody up to try and sell something that, hey, they don't really bloody need anyway. But
I think that's one
all
of the very
a lot of
big
the time,
things.
yeah,
It's one of the very big things that people often comment on when they work with me, because I often talk about not being excited because people are used to getting really excited about things. They hype themselves up. A lot of entrepreneurs I know, the thing they want to do in the morning is get themselves pumped. Pumped is a
Yeah.
word they use a lot. And I'm always thinking, don't pump yourself because you're going to end up exhausted if you do that. If you can just approach the day with this very neutral energy, it sounds boring when you first hear about it. It's like, oh no, there's nothing. But it's not boring because it's peaceful and you're so functional that you actually do things and it takes very little effort. And so instead of having the fulfillment of a kind of rattling emotions all the time, you have the fulfillment of getting things done and seeing the results of that, which is actually much more fulfilling. And you're also at peace with yourself from the inside.
And if you pump everybody up, they're going to have a big load.
And so are
So,
you.
and so are you. And the other thing is, then they're either going to say, well, what you were trying to pass on is either really shonky and hyped up, or they'll either buy in that instant, but then probably be regret it because it's you're keeping like a false pump.
And that's the same with teachers. A lot of
Yeah,
teaching is done as a kind of get everybody really excited. I always think of it like dogs or small children. If you get them really excited, they
yeah.
always crash afterwards. They get exhausted or somebody ends up crying. And it's so different when we can have this neutral energy. We don't need to use that excitement to try to hook ourselves into what we're doing because we're just going to do it anyway.
Probably a good example of that is the amount of concentration that you can hold while you're using neutral energy because you can do a lot of tasks. It's like multitasking, but you're multi-sensing. You're sensing all these different things that are going on. But while you're sensing, you're not going into all the emotions of what's going on. You're just sensing what all these different possibilities and outcomes can be. And because you use all these different receptors and processes that are built within your whole entire body or listening to your whole entire body, you can find the outcomes, but you find because you use your spirit, you also find this self truth, whether it's actually achievable.
That is
So,
such a good description. And now I'm beginning to understand what I do. Because I noticed this, but I didn't really know. I will go through different options, different
yeah.
possibilities, and I'll sense everything that I can about them. But the spirit kind of determines, is this aligned or not? Does this kind of fit with my truth? And I can also, if there's something we need to do and it feels a bit off, I can play with it. We just keep working at it, working at the idea until all the senses feel aligned. It's like my spirit's in the middle and everything's kind of connected and everything feels right. And it's like, okay, that's it. Now we've got it. Now we can do it. That's exactly how I do things. You must have
And we
taught me that.
find because we find all these different balances. And that's the thing. We go through so many exercises with everybody because we don't do it for you. We're on. I said basically say I liken myself to just like a tourist guide. I show you all the stuff that's there, but it's your choice if you want to look or not. You don't have to look, but
In a way, what I think you're doing is you're showing people's energy how it could be. And
yeah,
it's like your energy looks at that or feels into that and says, oh yeah, I want that. I don't want to be the way I am. I want to be like that because that feels more natural. That feels easier. It feels more graceful. So it's almost like you show our energy what's possible and you invite it and we can follow that invitation if we want to. I love the way that works.
and one of the biggest thing that I learned a long, long time ago, and it was because you become so intimate with your own energy, you become intimate with your own consciousness, and everything that's basically going on. But when you find that self intimacy, you find what you need, but then you find what you don't need, because that's when we find, because we're finding what we need, it's very easy to then just look at something and feel it, not so much feel it, but sense it. And that's the
Yeah.
thing, we're learning how to sense. But you feel these senses that are so pushy and they're fragmented, and you sense what isn't for the own betterment of yourself, because it is way over positive, it's way over negative, it doesn't fit in. And then we sort of can really discern where it comes from, and often it's stuff that's external to us, but we're just been dragging it all in unknowingly, because the more our energy functions, the less we take on and suck up about what's going on around us, because the more influential we are on our own self, we don't take on the influences of everybody else. So we find this highly functioning self. So when this self is highly functioning, you're not concerned with all the stuff that's all this crap that's going on out there, because it doesn't engage you. You don't engage it, and it's not, it's not beneficial, so you don't even worry about it. So you can, doesn't matter if you're highly sensitive, you can go into a crowd of like 10,000 people, um, and not feel overawed, because all this energy is pushing you around. Or even like at Christmas time, everyone's in this great big loop of, I gotta buy, I gotta buy, I gotta buy a present, I gotta buy a present, you know? And it's like, no, none of this stuff's for me. And then you think, I got it,
I'll go there.
I'll go there.
Yeah,
and
and you
and
find
then
it
all
right
this,
away.
yeah, and you find it straight away. Your
Yeah.
intuition and your instinct works completely different, and you find all these different things, and you just relax for 5 minutes, and it's like, got it.
So I want to say to people who may perhaps be just a little bit less sensitive, really treasure the highly sensitive people around you, especially if they're high functioning, highly sensitive people,
Mm.
because there's a lot of information that they're receiving that not everybody gets, and it's very useful information. So it's good to learn to listen. As highly sensitive people, we discover the power of listening to the information, because it's such a strong guidance in terms of making wise decisions, and decisions that are wise for the long term, not just for the short term. That's one of the very beautiful things I think about it. So, yeah, I mean, we could talk all day about.
Can I just say one thing also on this
Sure.
subject? Because your highly sensitive person, sometimes, I mean, sometimes there's people who are probably a little bit more like me in certain areas, where you'll be a little bit more extroverted, but at the same time I can be quite introverted, because I just listen. Because highly sensitive people actually enjoy listening.
And
They don't
sensible.
always have to be the one who's got to go rah, 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 rah. They can often be the one. So sometimes you've got to wait for that highly sensitive person to listen, to actually say something. And what is really good about the way the world is changing now, and everybody's on Zoom and Microsoft Office and all that sort of thing, is that a lot of the people who weren't previously talking, because they were drowned out by everybody. Hey, look at me! Hey, look at me! I'm more important. You should be looking at me, because not everyone who's talking really has something um, to say of value. So that now that sometimes the the person who's a little bit quieter, they're all contributing to so many different organizations way more effectively, because they're just sitting back and they're watching all these different conversations going on. And now then they take this and this, and then I say, well, yep, that's the stuff that's really valuable. And when you look through all your flow sheets and charts, it's easy to find that there's some people now who didn't contribute before. You'll find them contributing immensely, and it might be just small little tidbits here and there, but some of them are so, they got gems in there all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Great. Well, at least we have a bit more of a picture of what it's like to be highly functioning and highly sensitive. So we've moved a long way from high sensitivity being broken to it being really a gift. There are greater gifts even that we've not begun to
And we
speak
haven't even
about, but
touched.
we won't get to that yet. We'll hold that for the future. So thank you very much, David, and
Thanks for
thank you
asking me
for
questions.
listening to us. And yeah, we'll be back with more about this really fascinating topic.
Thanks for coming. Bye bye.